On a deadly winter night, deep in the snowy forests outside Denver, the wind howled like a living thing. But the silence shattered when a woman in a stunning red dress stepped onto the porch of her glass-walled cabin, with a massive German shepherd pressed against her legs like a loyal shadow. Neighbors down the trail whispered about her. Madison Clark, the mysterious young heiress who chose the wilderness over luxury, and the strange way Rex, her K9-trained shepherd, always sensed danger before anyone else. Then Rex froze. A sharp growl ripped through the cold and through the blinding snow. A newborn wrapped in a pastel pink blanket appeared on the steps, silent, fragile, impossibly alone. In that moment, the forest held its breath. A secret was awakening, one that would drag Madison into a storm far darker than the one outside her door. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Winter in the high forests outside Denver had a way of swallowing everything: sound, light, hope. On this particular night, the storm was the worst the region had seen in years. The sky churned with bruised clouds, the pines groaned under the weight of ice, and the wind carved through the valley like a living creature with claws of glass. Temperatures had plummeted so far below zero that even wildlife had vanished into burrows and hollows, surrendering to the brutal cold. Only one cabin remained lit on the East Ridge, a modern glass and wood home perched against a slope of frozen earth. The woman inside, Madison Clark, sat curled against a velvet armchair by the wide window, staring into the swirling white void. Madison was 27, tall, with a delicate figure that seemed almost sculpted, hourglass curves, long legs, and pale skin that glowed softly under firelight. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp, blue-gray, and edged with a quiet sadness, reflected a life more complicated than her outward elegance suggested. Despite the storm, she wore her signature red dress, a satin piece that dipped tastefully at the neckline and hugged her figure with effortless confidence. She was wealthy, the only child of a real estate magnate whose empire stretched across the West Coast. Yet money had never shielded her from loneliness, or from the quiet fear she carried after surviving a stalker incident 2 years earlier, an event that left her wary of strangers, of noises in the dark, and of silence too deep to trust. At her feet lay Rex, her 5-year-old German shepherd. Broad-chested and powerful, with thick winter fur the color of burnt gold and black, he carried the alertness of a trained guardian. Madison had adopted him from a retired K9 kennel, and the dog had the sharp instincts to prove it. His amber eyes were intelligent, scanning shadows even when resting, and the faint scar above his right paw told of a past filled with danger. Tonight, he lay with his head on his paws, but every muscle in his body remained ready. The storm intensified, rattling the glass walls of the cabin until they hummed. Snow spiraled like frantic ghosts. Madison lifted her steaming mug, trying to ignore the memories clawing at the back of her mind. Her father's death the previous winter, the break-in at her LA home years ago, the therapist's warning that trauma could echo longest in the quiet moments. Then Rex lifted his head, not slowly, not lazily. His ears snapped upright, his eyes locked on the door like a drawn arrow. Madison froze. "Rex?" Her voice was soft but tense. The shepherd rose, fur bristling, his frame angling toward the entrance. A low growl vibrated from his chest, steady, warning, unmistakable, Something was out there. Something alive. Before Madison could react, Rex lunged forward and collided with the heavy wooden door, barking once, sharp enough to cut through the storm's roar. Madison's heart slammed against her ribs. The stalker from 2 years ago had been arrested, but fear didn't care about facts. It remembered shapes in the dark. She stood, the hem of her red dress brushing her thighs, and reached for the flashlight on the table. Another growl. Then scratching. Faint at first, like twigs dragged across frozen wood. But it grew sharper, more frantic, as though something was clawing its way up the steps. Madison's breath fogged before her lips. With trembling fingers, she unlocked the door. A blast of wind punched into her, flinging her hair back and filling the room with swirling snow. "Rex, wait!" But the shepherd was already gone, swallowed by white nothingness. Madison stepped onto the porch, gripping the railing. The flashlight beam jittered across drifts of snow, but found nothing. "Rex!" she shouted over the storm. Panic rose hot in her chest. Then, through the blizzard, a dark shape emerged, staggering, heavy, determined. Rex. His fur was coated in ice, his steps unsteady, his breath ragged. But something hung from his jaws, something small, wrapped in soft pink. Madison blinked hard, thinking the cold was warping her vision. But no, there it was, a newborn, a tiny girl swaddled in a pastel pink blanket, her skin pale as frost, her lips losing color, her limbs limp like delicate porcelain frozen too long. Madison gasped and dropped to her knees. Rex laid the infant gently in her arms, then whined, a sound Madison had never heard from him. A plea, a command, a desperate cry for help. "Oh my God." Her voice trembled as she pulled the infant close. The baby was ice cold, frighteningly still. Not a cry, not a breath. Nothing. Madison raced inside, kicking the door shut behind her. She laid the baby before the fireplace, rubbing her tiny chest with trembling hands, her heart pounding so fiercely she felt it in her throat. "Come on, sweetheart. Please." She wrapped the blanket tighter, placed the infant against her own warm skin, whispered prayers she didn't even remember learning. Rex paced behind her, whining, nudging Madison's arm with urgency. Minutes stretched into a terrible eternity. Then, just as Madison felt the edges of despair clutch at her, the baby's tiny body jerked. Once, a faint flutter, a spark of life. And then, it stopped. Everything in the cabin froze with it. The baby's faint whimper barely rose above the crackling fire. Yet for Madison, it felt like the loudest sound she had ever heard. Relief washed over her in a trembling wave as she tightened her embrace around the tiny girl wrapped in pastel pink. Rex pressed close beside her, the heat of his sturdy 5-year-old German Shepherd body radiating against her legs. But even as Madison rocked the fragile infant gently, Rex's gaze kept darting to the door. His ears twitched, his tail dropped low. Something inside that trained, instinct-driven mind refused to settle. Madison noticed it when his pacing started. Slow circles, pausing at the entrance, then glancing back at her with a deep, urging intensity. Rex wasn't just alert. He was demanding, pleading. "You think there's more out there?" she whispered. Her breath wavered. Snow battered the windows with violent fists, but the dog's instincts were rarely wrong. She swaddled the newborn tighter against her chest, slipped on a thick winter coat over her red satin dress, and stepped outside with Rex at her heel. The air hit her like a wall of needles. The forest around the cabin, usually serene even in winter, felt brutal tonight. Every gust of wind carrying shards of ice, every tree bending under the storm's grip. Madison lifted her flashlight, its beam slicing through the snowstorm in trembling arcs. Rex moved with purpose now, lowering his nose to the powdery ground, following a path only he seemed able to read. They didn't walk far before the tracks appeared, deep tire marks gouged into the snow, their pattern jagged, suggesting a vehicle that had skidded violently. Madison's heart tightened. The tracks led down a small slope, ending at the dark silhouette of an SUV, half buried in a ditch. Its front was crushed against a snowbank, the doors flung open as if someone had escaped in panic. Madison approached the vehicle carefully. The SUV was black, large, expensive, a model preferred by families and executives, but the way it sat crookedly in the ditch spoke of desperation. She shone the light inside. Empty. The seats were dusted with snow blown in by the wind. No movement, no sound. Nothing but the remnants of a struggle. A torn scarf hanging from the doorframe. A dent on the dashboard. And on the back seat, barely visible under a blanket, a tiny pink bracelet, identical to the one fastened loosely around the newborn's wrist. Madison's breath caught. She lifted the bracelet with shaking fingers. So she wasn't alone. Her voice was swallowed instantly by the wind. A sharp crack echoed in the darkness, snow snapping under pressure. Rex stiffened. His ears shot upright. A deep growl rolled from his chest as he took a step forward, hackles rising like shadows made of fur and instinct. Madison swung her flashlight toward the forest. Rows of trees bent and swayed, branches heavy with ice. But between two thick pines, something moved. A figure. Just a flicker, a silhouette shifting through the blizzard, low to the ground, too steady to be blowing snow. Madison squinted. "Hello?" she called, her voice quivering. The figure paused, not fleeing, not approaching, just watching. Behind her, Rex barked once, sharp, commanding, a warning carved straight out of his old K-9 training. The shadow jerked back, then slipped deeper between the trees. Not animal-like, not natural, deliberate, as if it understood. Rex lunged, pulling against the invisible leash of obedience, but Madison grabbed his collar. "No, wait! I'm holding a baby!" She was shaking now, from cold, from fear, from the overwhelming reality that this wasn't an accident. Someone had been here. Someone might still be, and they might want the baby back. The thought made her stomach drop. Snow swallowed the last trace of the figure, but the unease remained. Thick, icy, pressing on the back of her neck. She stumbled away from the SUV, clutching the child protectively, Rex circling her like a furred wall of muscle and loyalty. As she followed the tire tracks back toward her cabin, a distant crack split the air again, like someone stepping on frozen branches. Watching her, measuring her. And as Madison reached the porch, baby trembling faintly against her chest, she dared to glance back one last time. Through the blur of white, a dark shape stood still at the tree line, unmoving, waiting. By the time Madison and Rex returned to the cabin, the storm had deepened into a curtain of white chaos, muffling every sound except the distant groan of bending pines. Madison locked the door, her hands still trembling from the encounter in the woods. She laid the newborn, fragile, pink-cheeked, barely breathing but alive, onto a soft blanket near the fireplace, then wrapped her more tightly in the pastel pink cloth. Rex positioned himself beside the infant immediately, lowering his massive German Shepherd body protectively, his amber eyes fixed on every faint twitch of the baby's chest. Madison, still dressed in her red satin dress beneath her thick coat, reached for her phone to call the authorities. Her voice shook as she explained what she had found. The crashed SUV, the abandoned child, the shadow in the woods. The dispatcher promised to send officers once the roads cleared. It could take hours in the blizzard. Madison gently rocked the baby, trying to calm both her and herself. Her fingers brushed the little bracelet again, so small, so bright against the child's chilled skin. She wanted to remember this moment, not just out of fear, but because it felt like fate had placed this tiny life into her hands. Without thinking, she lifted her phone and snapped a picture. A young woman in a red dress kneeling by the fire, a newborn curled safely against her chest, and Rex lying like a vigilant guardian, his strong posture softened only by the protective tilt of his head. She sent it to her closest friend, Heather Green, a sharp-tongued paralegal with curly blonde hair, and an intuitive warmth that made her Madison's only real connection to city life. Heather was 30, short, with a round face and freckles, and had a fierce loyalty that made her protective as a big sister. Madison typed, "I need legal advice. I found a baby." Long story. She didn't expect Heather to forward the photo, but within an hour it somehow slipped onto a small community page. By midnight, thousands of people across Denver had shared it. Comments exploded. Who is this baby? Who is this woman? Was the child abandoned? Who's the heroic dog? Madison didn't see the chaos online. She was too busy keeping the baby warm, too busy listening anxiously for the police. And when dawn finally bled softly across the snow and the storm eased, 2 officers made their way up the road. A patrolman named Officer Miles Turner and his partner, Officer Brianna Hale. Turner was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with several days of dark stubble shadowing his jaw. His brown eyes held the kind of exhaustion that only comes from years of seeing the worst of people. He was a quiet man, structured, professional, the type who measured his words carefully after a bad shooting incident 10 years ago left him deeply cautious. Hale, in contrast, was in her late 20s, with short black hair, sharp cheekbones, and a confident manner that hinted at growing up with 3 older brothers. She was direct but warm, her deep green eyes examining the cabin with quick, practiced sweeps. They stepped inside and Hale's posture softened at the sight of the baby. "She's so small," she murmured. Turner crouched down beside Rex, studying the dog with keen respect. "He brought her to you?" Madison nodded. Turner exhaled slowly. "Then he may have saved her life." As Madison recounted everything, the SUV, the tire marks, the bracelet, the officers exchanged troubled looks. Hale pulled up a file on her tablet. A missing persons report from the previous evening. A woman named Claire Harding, age 26, described as slender, with long auburn hair and pale skin, traveling with her newborn daughter, Emma Harding. Claire had been fleeing a suspected human trafficking ring. The details made Madison's skin crawl. Turner rubbed his temples, muttering, "If the same people who chased her are still out there." His words trailed off as 3 phones buzzed at once. Hale's, Turner's, then Madison's. Notifications, calls, messages. Rex barked sharply as if sensing the incoming storm. Hale answered first, listening. Then her eyes widened slightly. She turned to Madison. "Your photo. It's everywhere. News channels are asking about you." Madison's heart sank. She never wanted attention. The trauma of her past break-in made her avoid strangers. Now the whole city was looking for her. Messages flooded in, reporters wanting interviews, animal charities wanting to thank her, random strangers praising Rex. Heather texted frantically. "Mads, your face is on the morning news. Everyone wants to know the story." But for Madison, only one thing mattered: the baby now sleeping in her arms. The officers stayed for another hour, collecting evidence, taking statements, inspecting the bracelet. When they finally left, promising to return with detectives, Madison locked the door again and swaddled the baby closer. Snow began to fall once more, quiet, thick, unsettling. Madison turned off her phone, craving silence. The fire popped. The cabin creaked. Rex suddenly stiffened again. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards as headlights cut across the snow outside. Not police headlights. Not a neighbor's. A long, dark SUV, no plates, no markings, rolled to a slow, predatory stop at the edge of the forest line. Then, 3 heavy knocks slammed against her door. Madison's heartbeat thudded painfully in her ears as she cracked the cabin door open, just enough to peer outside. Snow whipped across the porch in violent swirls, and the night felt heavier than it should. Too still, too listening. She kept one arm tightly wrapped around the newborn, her pastel pink blanket glowing faintly in the shadows, while her other hand gripped the doorframe for balance. The red satin of Madison's dress shimmered under the dim porch light, striking and vulnerable all at once. Rex planted himself in front of her, shoulders broad, tail straight, muscles taut beneath his golden black fur. His lips curled back just enough to show the gleam of sharp canine teeth, ready to strike. Standing outside was a man who did not belong to the snow or the forest. He was in his early 50s, tall and slender with a polished air, his gray wool coat tailored perfectly to his narrow frame. His hair, peppered silver and black, was slicked back neatly, revealing a long, angular face with sharp cheekbones. His skin was pale, almost sallow, and his eyes were a disturbingly still shade of gray, like frozen lakes with no reflection. He introduced himself as Mr. Hollis Crane, claiming to be a lawyer representing the infant's supposed family. His voice was smooth and calm, but that calmness carried the weight of something deeply practiced and insincere. He had the tone of a man accustomed to bending people with words alone. 2 men flanked him, a pair of bodyguards who looked nothing like lawyers. One was short and stocky, with thick arms and a crooked nose. His shaved head gleamed under the porch light. The other was tall, muscular, with a square jaw covered in dark scruff and a faint scar cutting across his left eyebrow. Their expressions were blank, but their posture was far too rigid, predatory rather than protective. Mr. Crane extended an envelope toward her, revealing paperwork that claimed full guardianship authorization. "We appreciate your assistance, Miss Clark," he said coolly. "But the child is expected elsewhere. We can take her now." Madison's stomach twisted. The baby stirred weakly against her chest. Even without reading a word of the documents, she knew something was wrong. No police call had confirmed the baby's identity. No one had issued a retrieval order, and real attorneys did not trek into the mountains during a blizzard without prior contact. "She's receiving medical care," Madison replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "Everything must go through the police." Mr. Crane smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried no warmth, only threat. "I assure you, Miss Clark, the authorities are aware." Madison's grip tightened around the baby. Rex growled again, louder this time. The air shifted. Mr. Crane's eyes flicked to the dog with a flash of irritation. He slipped a small card from his coat pocket, a stark white rectangle with nothing printed on it except a phone number. No name, no firm. "Call when you're ready to cooperate," he murmured. "Children are fragile things. They shouldn't be kept from the people who want them back." He pivoted gracefully on his heel and walked toward the SUV. His two guards followed, their boots leaving deep, heavy impressions in the snow. Madison watched them go, her breath shaking as the SUV's headlights cut through the storm, then disappeared beyond the tree line. She shut the door, locked it, then shoved a chair against the knob for good measure. As darkness swallowed the cabin, the lights flickered once, then died. The sudden blackout plunged the room into a chilling blue gloom. Only the fireplace remained, sputtering faint orange breaths of flame. Madison pulled the pink bundle closer and huddled beside the sofa. Rex stayed at the window, body low, eyes locked on the dark forest beyond. Hours crawled by. Wind clawed at the walls. The fire crackled weakly. Madison tried calling Officer Hale, but the signal was nothing but static and broken fragments. She clutched the sleeping infant, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. Then, soft, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, footsteps outside. Slow, heavy. Someone was approaching. Rex's growl deepened, turning dangerous. Madison held her breath as snow shifted just beyond the porch. A shadow moved past the window. A flicker of movement at the door. And then the doorknob, still locked, still jammed with the chair, began to turn. Slowly, silently. Someone was trying to come inside. The gunshot cracked through the forest like a lightning strike. Sharp, violent, final. Lily screamed as the sound echoed against the cliffs, her tiny body tensing in terror. Shadow lunged instinctively, bracing for pain, but the bullet never reached him. Instead, it struck a sun-warmed boulder near the cliff's edge, ricocheting in a sharp metallic ping before vanishing into the ravine below. Dust and pebbles scattered across the ground as Brent Holloway cursed, stumbling back from the force of the misfire. In the same breath, the woods erupted. Sirens wailed from the valley, first distant, then close enough to rattle the leaves. Birds fled from tree canopies in a frenzy. The hunters turned as the underbrush cracked open, and forest rangers in olive-green uniforms emerged, flanked by search and rescue medics in bright orange vests. The ground trembled with their arrival. Leading them was Officer Dana Morales, a woman in her mid-30s with a strong, athletic build. Her brown hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and her tan skin glowed under the sunlight. Sharp cheekbones and deep-set hazel eyes gave her a sense of authority even before she spoke. Dana was known in the region for being fiercely protective of children and animals, traits forged after she'd once lost a young hiker during a winter storm years ago, a tragedy that still haunted her. "Drop your weapons!" Dana barked, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel. Kyle Briggs tried to raise his hands in surrender, his hawk-like features twisting with sudden fear. But Brent, stubborn and reckless, began to turn his rifle toward Dana. He never got the chance. One of the rangers, Officer Leon Tate, a tall and broad man with dark skin and a gentle demeanor, tackled Brent to the ground with practiced precision. Leon's deep voice thundered, "Enough!" Within moments, the hunters were surrounded. Radios crackled, cuffs clicked shut, and Mason Creeley, trembling more from fear than resistance, allowed himself to be pinned to a pine trunk by two rangers. The danger that had shadowed Lily through the forest finally dissolved under sunlight and trained authority. Shadow, however, was not focused on them. He was focused on Lily. The German shepherd limped toward her, sniffing her hands, nudging her cheek with a soft whine. Lily, shaking from adrenaline, wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur. She didn't care that her face was streaked with dirt or that her jacket was torn. Shadow was alive. That was enough. Officer Dana knelt beside her, her expression melting from battle readiness into maternal concern. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" Lily shook her head, wiping her tears with her sleeve. I'm okay. Shadow protected me." "Shadow?" Dana repeated softly, glancing at the dog. She reached out carefully, letting Shadow sniff her hand. Up close, she noticed the faded metal tag under his fur. Her eyes sharpened. "Hold on. He has an ID." One of the medics, Dr. Evan Brooks, approached. He was a slim man in his late 40s, sandy brown hair streaked with gray, glasses perched on a slightly crooked nose. Evan had a calm, comforting presence, the kind of man who laughed easily yet carried invisible weight from years of treating injured animals. He knelt beside Donna and examined the tag. "It's from Rescue Unit 9, Evan said, astonishment softening his voice. "These dogs were part of advanced mountain rescue teams. Most went missing after a helicopter crash 5 years ago." Lily gasped. He was a hero before?" Shadow lowered his head, leaning gently against her legs. Donna smiled. "Seems he still is." Shadow was transported to a temporary veterinary station set up nearby. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tree canopy, casting warm patterns across the clearing where the team worked. Lily sat beside Shadow the whole time, clutching his fur as if letting go would make him vanish. Dr. Evan cleaned Shadow's wounds, checked his vitals, and eventually leaned back with a relieved sigh. "He's fine. Just scratches and bruises. Honestly, healthier than most dogs I treat. Stronger, too. Almost makes me jealous." A ripple of laughter passed through the small medical tent, easing the tension like cool breeze on a summer evening. Moments later, Lily's parents burst into the clearing. Mark Carter, still wearing his camping flannel, dropped to his knees and wrapped his daughter in a fierce embrace. His rugged features, normally stoic, crumbled with emotion. "Lily, my God, we were so scared." Sarah Carter followed, tears streaking her freckled cheeks, chestnut hair cascading around her shoulders. She scooped Lily into her arms, pressing trembling kisses to her forehead. "Sweetheart, don't you ever wander off like that again." Lily's voice wavered. "Mom, Shadow saved me. He never left me." Mark turned to the German shepherd, eyes filling with gratitude. Shadow met his gaze steadily, calm yet alert. Mark reached out and stroked his head. "Thank you, you brave dog." Dana stepped forward. "Since he's been missing for years and there's no surviving handler to claim him, Shadow needs a new home." Before the sentence fully landed, Lily shot up her hand. "Ours! He can live with us! He can have my extra pillow and all the treats we can buy." The adults exchanged smiles, soft ones, the kind that came from witnessing innocence heal fear. By sunset, the danger felt like a distant echo. The forest glowed with gold as Lily and Shadow walked hand in paw down a familiar trail. Her laughter drifted through the trees, mixing with the rustling leaves and the gentle chirping of crickets. Shadow trotted beside her, tail wagging lightly, head high as though he knew this was the beginning of something new. From that day on, the German Shepherd became the carter's steadfast guardian, the protector of summer, half hero, half best friend. And sometimes, when the warm wind whispered through the treetops, Lily swore she heard the forest murmur, "You were sent to the right one." In the quiet that followed the storm, as life slowly returned to the forest and warmth filled the cabin once again, one truth lingered in every breath of wind. Miracles still walk among us. Sometimes they come on four paws with golden fur and loyal eyes. Sometimes they arrive in the arms of a stranger wearing a red dress. And sometimes they are wrapped in a pastel pink blanket, too small to understand the darkness they survived, yet strong enough to remind the world that God still watches over the lost. What happened that winter night was more than survival. It was a reminder that in the coldest moments of our lives, grace can still break through like sunlight on snow. The kind of grace only God can place in the path of those who need it most. A reminder that even when evil rises, love rises stronger. That no matter how heavy the storm becomes, heaven always finds a way to guide the right people together. And maybe that is the message for all of us. Look for the miracles in your everyday life, because they are there. In kindness, in courage, in the moments when someone chooses to care. We may not always see God's hand, but we feel it in the unexpected goodness that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, let it be a blessing you pass forward. Share this video so others may feel the warmth of hope. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from, or share a miracle you've witnessed in your own life. Subscribe to the channel to walk with us through more stories of faith, courage, and the love that binds humans and animals alike. And as you go on with your day, may the Lord place light upon your path. May His angels watch over your home, and may His grace surround you. Just as it surrounded Madison, Rex, Claire, and little Emma on the coldest night of their lives, may God bless you and keep you safe.